Hey everybody, Derek Simon from Database Betting, and today we're going to look at the 2025 Preakness Stakes. First, let's start with the elephant in the room, the fact that Sovereignty, the Kentucky Derby winner, will not be in the Preakness Stakes. This has been somewhat controversial. I hear a lot of people saying that, the fans should just shut up. Bill Mott knows what he's doing. He's got the experience. He trains racehorses. You don't. And the funny thing is, this is a complete difference from the way racing used to be. There's a horse by the name of Majestic Prince in 1969. He won the Kentucky Derby. He won the Preakness Stakes. And after the Preakness Stakes, actually during the Preakness Stakes, he bore out in the stretch, and trainer John Longden, who of course used to be a great jockey, said he's not at his best, that there's a problem with one of his ligaments, and that they shouldn't go in the Belmont Stakes. And that was the plan. And it was the press that put on pressure. Longden was always against it. And what happened is in the Belmont Stakes, Majestic Prince ran okay, but he lost to Arts and Letters, thereby not winning the Triple Crown. And here's the crazy thing. Arts and Letters won Horse of the Year that year and top 3-year-old, even though Majestic Prince beat him in 2 out of 3 matchups and was injured in the third. Again, it just tells you how racing has changed. However, take whatever opinion you want on it. Sovereignty is not running, so let's take a look at the field that is. I will say that Sovereignty was going to be up against it in the Preakness anyway. When you have a horse that wins the Kentucky Derby at longer odds, now admittedly it's a little bit tricky recently because the fields are so much bigger and they're all individual interests. But as a general rule, when you win as a long shot, your chances of winning the Preakness Stakes go down. Kentucky Derby winners as a whole win 43% of the time in the Preakness Stakes when they run. If horses didn't contest the pace or didn't really have to extend themselves at all early, they tend not to repeat in the Preakness Stakes. And the reason for that, and I first learned about this, I think, from Ed Fountaine, one of those American Turf monthlies, or one of those old racing magazines, is that you often see a change of pace in the Preakness. It's become fairly well known now that if the pace is really fast in the Kentucky Derby, often in the Preakness it will be slower. So the horses that didn't perform well in the Kentucky Derby but pressed the pace will often reverse their fortunes. Louis Quatorze is a great example of this because he got just shellacked in the Kentucky Derby, came back to win. Oxbow being another. Oxbow actually ran very, very well in a fast-paced race in the Kentucky Derby and then came back to win the Preakness in wire-to-wire fashion. So that's one of the things that you see quite often. What I've noticed, though, and this goes back, this is why I brought up the story of Majestic Prince, is that in anything in life, people adapt. At one time, when the three-point shot first became part of the NBA arsenal, teams weren't that good at it. You didn't have a lot of teams shooting a lot of threes, and they certainly weren't as proficient as they are today. But as the game changed and you started to get into analytics, that shot became a much bigger part of the NBA. Some would say to its detriment. But the point is that as things change, people will adapt. One of the things that's happened with modern racing is that nobody thinks you can run quickly. You can't, turn around quickly anymore. H. Allen Jerkins, to his dying day, resisted this notion. And if you don't know who H. Allen Jerkins is, he was known as the Giant Killer. He beat Secretariat several times, and he often came back on very short rest. And he, like I said, advocated it until the day he died. But you don't see that as much anymore. And I bring that up because at one point, being a new shooter in the Kentucky Derby was an absolute no-no. I'm going to give you the complete stats here. Here's the database that I've got. And you'll notice in the history of the Preakness Stakes, you've got a 0.44 impact value and a 85-cent average return. That's for a $2 wager. So not at all effective. But look what's happened in the past few years. Seize the Gray, National Treasure, Early Voting, Rombauer. So the last 4 Preakness Stakes have been won by a horse that did not compete in the Kentucky Derby. So this may be a stat that is changing. One thing that hasn't changed that much is if you are a new shooter, you really need to have run well. If you look at horses that finished worse than third or out of the money, again, this is in the history of the Preakness, 2 for 81. That's a 0.25 impact value, which you can see right there. Once again, you did have a recent exception with National Treasure, although there you saw the change of pace kind of play or come into play as National Treasure went wire to wire in that Preakness. The other thing that I found interesting, and again, I would take this with a grain of salt, is where did the new shooter last run? And if you look here, we've got Keeneland. I want to reset this. If the horse last ran at Keeneland, and that's typically the Bluegrass Stakes, you'll notice only one winner in 42 tries. It's a 0.25 impact value. Oaklawn Park, I don't think there's been a single winner. 0 for 21. Santa Anita, we'll take a look at that one real quick. 1 for 11. One of the more productive places actually is Churchill Downs, where you see 2 for 35. It's still not great, but 2 for 35. And then Laurel, let's check that one because a lot of times you have horses coming out of the Tessio. So we'll take a look at Laurel's stats. And there we see 0 for 6. That's not really that surprising because, again, most of the horses that last raced at Laurel will have raced in a lower grade race too. The other thing that the Preakness really stresses is the best horse. And I've talked about this before, that generally the best horse wins the Preakness Stakes. This is a list of the Preakness Stakes, at least through 1873, going back a ways. And you notice that favorites have a 48.6% winning rate, and they actually turn a profit. Now, if you look in the past, since like 2000, that is going to go down, but it's still a decent number. You still have 40% winners. That's higher than the national average, and just a 0.8% negative ROI. I bring that up because, of course, we've got Journalism, which I don't think too many people would argue that he's the best horse in this year's Preakness Stakes. So let's take a look at the field in light of some of these statistics. And we'll start with goal oriented. Now, I talked to you guys about changing training methods and changing perceptions as the game has evolved. This is a good example of that. Goal oriented is a front runner that is in the Preakness Stakes. There's actually quite a few of them. There's quite a bit of speed in here, which makes it somewhat interesting. Goal oriented is very lightly raced, but it is a Baffert horse. He's coming off that typical great work. This is a horse that I could see contesting the pace. I actually think, and this is just my thoughts on it, you may differ in this area. And by the way, when it comes to pace, it's often a crapshoot because it depends on what the connections want to do. So if you know what the connections want to do, that will obviously give you an edge. I think they're going to want to press. I don't think they're going to go out and fight for the lead because there is quite a bit of speed in the field this year. And I think that puts goal oriented at a disadvantage because this is going to be the toughest field he's ever faced. Obviously, last time optional claimer. And then, of course, he had his maiden win. Here is Journalism, and I want to show you guys something real quick because we were talking about the change of pace. This is the Kentucky Derby chart, and I want to go to the links where they show the links behind. So this is the look where you see the links that they were leading or trailing. And you notice Sovereignty, 9 1/4 lengths back. Journalism, just 5 lengths back at the quarter. This is considered the first call. This is the half call. You notice there's still 5 lengths between them. So Journalism had to expend more early energy. Once again, that would give him an edge, even if Sovereignty were in this race. But he wasn't that far back. He was actually closer. If you look at the top 4, he was the closest of all the top 4 finishers. I think Owen Almighty ran a heck of a race. Watch him coming back because this was amazing. There was no horse that was this close. So keep that in mind looking forward. But Journalism was fairly close. The other horse that I want to highlight here because he's in the race is American Promise. You'll notice he was third, just back 2 lengths at that half call. Big form turnarounds are very, very common in the Preakness Stakes. I mentioned Louis Quatorze. Oxbow didn't run that badly, but he was still, I think he was 5th in the Kentucky Derby. It's very common for horses to reverse their fortunes in the Preakness Stakes. So I would not hold the big loss by American Promise against it, but we'll talk about that when we get to him. I mentioned Journalism again. He's the best horse. He's going to be favored. He's definitely the horse to beat. There's just no mincing words there. He is the horse to beat. So a lot of it is going to come down to price. 8 to 5 morning line. I think that's fair. these are my fair odds for a program I have. I don't think that that's a real good number. I actually think he's going to be somewhat less than 8 to 5. I don't think odds on is a great value bet, but if it's above even odds, I think he's going to be really tough to beat. So here we come to American Promise. And again, you notice he was very close. This was after that big win in the Virginia Derby, and he just bounced sky high. And you guys remember my Derby video, I talked about those big progressions. And you kind of saw that with American Promise. He bounces in the Kentucky Derby. He was up against it in terms of pace. This is a horse that even though he's rated an E5, and the E is kind of a Sarton style designation, the 5 are the Curran speed points, this horse has come off the pace. Typically, those E designations are horses that need the lead or are very, very close to the lead. And you'll see in his wins that has been the case. But he's run some good races slightly off the pace. This is a horse that I think can press. Here's where I actually like D. Wayne Lucas a lot. D. Wayne Lucas is no stranger to big form turnarounds. And so American Promise at 15 to 1 on the morning line is definitely a horse I would be keeping in the mix. Heart of Honor, we just don't have that much to go on. He's been racing in Dubai. Again, the new shooter stats are against him, and especially shipping that far. I would need a big price on this horse to play it. Looking at Pay Billy. Pay Billy won his last race in the Federico Tessio, and that was at Laurel. He's a decent enough horse. He's a little bit on the slow side and is not a horse that I would be considering for my win tickets. River Thames, this horse ran very, very well in the Bluegrass, but we saw those stats at Keeneland. Not the kind of new shooter that I like. If I'm going to play a new shooter, I want to see that horse have an advantage. This is a horse that's got early speed, but probably won't get the lead. I don't think wants the lead. And so again, it doesn't really give him any particular advantage here. And at 9 to 2 on the morning line, that's really short. Not a horse that I would be interested in terms of the win. Once again, Sandman, probably the biggest underlay in the race. I said that about his Kentucky Derby run. He went off at 5 to 1 in the Kentucky Derby. Just a horrible price. And here you have a confirmed closer that didn't fire in the Kentucky Derby despite getting great pace conditions. So where does he get the advantage today? The pace is certainly not going to be significantly faster than the Kentucky Derby. I don't think it's going to be significantly slower either, but I just don't see an advantage here. And I cannot take 4 to 1. If this horse goes off anywhere close to 10 to 1, 12 to 1, 15 to 1, maybe. I still wouldn't be interested, just being honest. But if you do like Sandman, I would suggest looking for a higher price. Clever Again is really, really interesting because you have a horse shipping in from Oaklawn Park. I showed you guys the stats on that. They're not good. This horse does have a lot of speed. This is an E8, so you're looking at an early runner with 8 Curran speed points. He has wired the field in both of his wins, and they've been shorter races. So now stretching out a little bit, it's very likely that this horse will want to be on the lead. Here's the tricky part with Clever Again. If you look at the ESRs, and there's only 2 that we can go on because the first race was at 4.5 furlongs, they're not that quick. So this is a horse that likes to get a slower pace. I'm kind of on the fence with Clever Again. But what boots me off the fence into the next yard is those 5 to 1 morning line odds. I just think that's too low. Because again, there are a lot of question marks with a horse like this because he hasn't won from off the pace. He hasn't shown that he can go a real distance of ground. And he pretty much has to get the lead based on what we see here. He might be able to rate, but we don't know that. And what I always say about factors that you don't know about is that you need to make sure that the odds are rewarding you for that risk. I don't think that's going to be the case here. And last but not least, it's a number 9 horse. This is Gosker. And once again, not a lot of advantages. I do really like this LSR. Now, the LSR is my late speed ration. That's a measurement of late energy disbursement. And in this case, the higher the better. A -5, you notice I have it highlighted in green because that's a good number. Speed figures have not been great, but He's a horse that I could see some appeal, and the difference here is you've got 20-1 on the morning line. So people who want to play Gosker, I can see that a little bit more given the prices. Once again, these are morning line odds too. We don't know if this will hold in the Preakness Stakes. But as of right now, we're about 2 days from the actual race. Obviously, like journalism, and I think American Promise is going to turn things around in Pimlico too, or certainly could. Watch the prices. That's going to be really the telling part. Thanks for watching. Hope you all have a great Preakness day.